How hard can it be to make a choice? What if you're a high school student making big plans for the future, but your first serious romantic feeling interferes? You have to make the hardest choices that will determine your future.
I'm Kay, and I met my husband when I was 17. It was at a pool hall. He came up to me and offered to have a beer with him and his friends. I didn't tell him how old I was. A few months later, he took me away. That's how our relationship began. Greg was kind and gentle. We had 2 sons, Casey and Jim. Today, the priest is coming to bless our house.
After performing the blessing ceremony of the Albright home, the priest is staying with them for lunch. The senior human resources manager of the company where Greg works informs him that he is laid off, but the company is paying him a good stipend. After dinner, Kay and Greg wash dishes in the kitchen. They are saddened. Jim says that he is preparing an application form for uni and he is counting on a scholarship as a runner. Jim runs around the stadium. His buddy Nick catches up with him and asks if he has written an essay on James Joyce. Jim immediately stops practicing and goes to the library. There he sees a pretty girl, Anne, and observes her. In the literature class, Nick reads out a passage from the story Arabia. Jim comes to the rehearsal of the school circle. Anne reads a monologue about love from the stage. Spanish class is in progress. Jim knocks on the door and hands the teacher a note from Mr. Roughton. The teacher hands the note to Anne, and she leaves the classroom. Jim waits for her in the hallway and tells her that he wrote the note. Jim wants to talk to her, but Anne hurries back to class. After class, Anne approaches Jim, sitting behind the wheel of a car, and asks him for a ride. Jim brings Anne to the beach, which has a marvelous view of the ocean. Jim smiles embarrassedly and asks Anne if she wants to be an actress. The girl says she's going to college, since there is a lot of competition for acting studios. Jim notes that she has talent. Anne says if Jim wants to see her, it can be done without a note. The girl then promises to call over the weekend. At home, Janine's mother asks Anne about why she's home late. The girl says that a friend gave her a ride and they chatted for a while. Her mum replies that her daughter has entered the age when everyone falls in love. Greg is having a conversation with his employer. Greg tells her that he is about to get his degree in analytics. Greg says he is organized and planned. Mark, Greg's brother, comes to visit. At the table, Kay asks him why his wife Trish didn't come. He replies that she found a second job related to real estate. Greg gives his brother job advice, but he refuses it and calls him a loser. An argument begins between Greg and Mark. They argue about work and about their father, who is now bankrupt and living in a nursing home. Jim arrives at Anne's birthday party. A game of fantasy begins. Anne pulls out a note with a task that says she will sit blindfolded and be kissed in turn by 3 people. She has to rate the kisses on a scale of 10. The last person to kiss her is Jim, and he gets the highest score. Anne takes off her blindfold and stares at him in surprise. The next day, Anne's friends tell her that Jim is very strange and rarely goes to parties. But Anne thinks he is very nice. Jim gives Anne a ride home and gives her a present for her past birthday, a CD of romantic songs. Anne and Jim kiss. Anne and Jim start dating. Jim introduces the girl to his parents. Jim is visiting Anne. They go swimming in the pool. Anne says that they are completely alone. On her initiative, the couple makes love for the first time. Greg suggests that his wife dance. During the dance, Kay says that Greg forgot it was their anniversary. He kisses his wife tenderly and apologizes. After the guests leave, the spouses make love. In the morning, lying in bed, Jim professes his love to Anne. Anne has dinner with her mother. She says that Anne's happiness should not depend on one man. A world of possibilities and experiences opens up before her. Her mother wants her to be open to everything. Anne tells Jim that she will soon be leaving to study in New York. Jim replies that they will still call each other and go somewhere together. Anne doesn't know what to say and decides to leave things the way they are for now. Anne talks to the auditor. He says that her family has a lot of debt and suggests selling the house. Kay tells her husband that she wants to get a second job. Greg replies to tell her to take her time as he waiting to hear back from some companies. Kay offers to sell the house and buy a smaller house. Greg doesn't want to do that. Jim hears a conversation between his parents. Toll makes signs of attention to Anne and she accepts them. She barely speaks to Jim anymore. Jim doesn't understand what's going on and talks to Anne about it. The girl says that they were good together. Jim is sad as he was expecting something more. The school year ends. The graduates receive their diplomas. Nick tells Jim that his father got him an internship at the New York Yacht Club and he's leaving in 3 weeks. And Jim is going to go to California and continue running. Jim sees that Anne is in the stadium with Toll. Nick advises him to forget her. Toll approaches Jim and asks how he was able to get Anne to make love to him. Jim pounces on Toll with fists. Anne runs up and demands that the guys stop fighting. The parents tell their son that they have decided to sell the house. Greg is talking to Jim. His father asks about his relationship with Anne. Greg says that time must pass, and if it is fated, she will definitely come back. Kay wipes away her tears as she leaves the house. 2 years later, Jim comes to visit his parents, who now live in a small apartment. Kay hugs her son. Jim talks to his father. Greg still hasn't found a steady job. Jim then talks to the mother. She says it is hard to look at Greg as he feels guilty for disappointing everyone. Jim gives his mother the money for the computer he sold. Jim is relaxing on the lawn at the city park. He listens to a voicemail on his phone from Anne. She apologizes for treating him badly and wants to talk to him. Jim calls Anne. He says he has no ill feelings toward her. Jim sits at the bar with Nick. He tells him that he talked to Anne. Nick advises him to forget her as there is more to come. He points to a neighboring table where a group of girls are seated and goes to meet them. Jim meets Anne. She tells him that her relationships with guys have not been working out over the past time. Anne takes Jim to her house and turns on a CD he gave her. They kiss and make love. Anne wonders about the relationship between them. Jim offers to drive the girl to the airport. Anne confesses that she loves him and always has. Jim confesses his love as well. Greg delivers bottles of drinking water to the offices. Kay returns after work with bags of groceries. Greg and Kay fight about him always sitting at home in the dark and depressed. Greg turns off the TV and puts on his shoes. He says he is going to the gym. Kay wants to have a normal conversation with her husband and discuss the problems that have accumulated since they are a family. There is no running away from the difficulties, but Greg doesn't want to hear about work and problems. He wants to play sports. Kay feels like they hardly notice each other. Kay breaks down into yelling, but she says they are a family and are not going to give up and advises Greg to do the same. Greg silently walks away. Jim is jogging and suddenly feels pain in his chest. Jim is examined and the doctor informs him that he has a spontaneous pneumothorax on the right side, that is, a rupture in a lung. Jim undergoes surgery. Anne flies in from New York. She stays by his side while Jim goes through post-operative rehabilitation. Then Anne says she needs to go back to school, but Jim is tired of these separations and so is Anne. Jim shows his mother his engagement ring and says he wants to get married. Kay doesn't think it's the right time to get married, but she thinks back to her youth. Kay always knew Greg was her soulmate. She sincerely embraces her son. Jim meets with Janine, Anne's mom, and says he wants to propose to her daughter. Janine is at a loss and asks how they are going to live their lives. But Jim says there is never a right time, but he wants to be her rock. He will never betray her or let her down. Greg comes home and apologizes for coming in late. Kay says that the company in Phoenix called and wants to meet Greg in person. Kay has a good feeling about it. Greg says that even if they hire him, they can't move in now because it would violate the lease. But Kay reassures him and says they will figure something out. She says they can take a road trip and rent a cabin. The important thing is that they have each other. Greg and Kay go to Phoenix. They rent a guest house in the woods. Greg is surprised, as it seems like yesterday to him. He remembers from his childhood how his father rented this very cabin every summer. Kay notices that they also stayed here after college. Greg suggests moving to another country if things don't work out with the job. He thinks they could rent a 3-bedroom house there and live just fine on $1,500 a month. While jogging through the woods, Greg sees a man with his 2 sons setting up a tent and waves to him. After the interview, Kay asks her husband about the results. Greg replies that it went well, but a decision will come later. He felt for a very long time that the world had opened its jaws to swallow us up, but Kay saw a new way. Anne and Jim get married. The wedding takes place in a church. You can't live your life waiting for happiness. You have to create happiness for yourself. Marriage won't lead to it. You have to find your way in your new life together. Sometimes it takes years. Happiness only comes through effort. That's what makes you husband and wife. A modest marriage party is held at Janine's house. Greg makes a toast.
Life together, vacations, birthdays, weddings are memories, and they're what we're making now. There's nothing stronger and better than good memories, especially when it comes to children or a home. That's the best part. Jim and Anne, look back and keep that memory alive until the very end. It will save you.